Now that you have finalized the budget for your event, it is now time to pick the location, the dates, and the venue. From my experience, this part of the event planning process typically takes the most time because in order to find the right location, find a venue that you like, and find a venue that's available, enter into negotiations and get a final contract signed, it's usually a 2 to 4 month process if you're really on top of things. But in the past, I've even had this phase last up to 6 months. So depending on the size of your event, I recommend getting started on this part of phase 2 about 12 to 18 months out from the event. Of course, if your event is smaller, maybe a couple hundred people, you don't need to start finding a venue 18 months in advance. But if you're throwing an event for a couple thousand people, event space is going to be really hard to come by. And you need to make sure you're getting your name in there on venues before all the space is taken up. And this is definitely true for resorts. At convention centers, there's a lot of event space that can hold a couple thousand people, so you should be able to find somewhere. However, there are only a handful of resorts in the country that can handle a couple thousand person event. So if you want to throw your event at a resort, I definitely recommend starting early. All right, so here is how I approach the location, date, and venue selection process. Step number 1, I like to start out by selecting the time of year that I want to throw the event. Maybe it's an event that I'm going to throw in a tropical location, so I want to do it during the winter or fall, so it's a really good experience for someone to escape the cold and go to the heat. Or maybe I want to do it at a time of year where people aren't really taking vacations. Or maybe I want to throw it in a location that is really good during the spring or summer. Whatever it is, I first like to start off by selecting the time of year that I want to throw the event. And I'll typically narrow it down to a 1 to 2 month range. Then step number 2, I will typically pick 3 to 5 locations throughout the United States or throughout the world where I want to throw the event. So maybe I decide that I want to throw the event in the springtime. The 2 month range that I narrow it down to is March and April. And the 3 locations I'm gonna consider throwing the event are Miami, Orlando, Nashville, Los Angeles, and San Diego. Now this actually narrows it down quite a bit. I've got my time of year, I've got the 1 to 2 month range, and I have 5 cities to work with. And that really gives me a small pool of venues to look at. Another rule I like to stick to when picking locations for my events is I like to pick a place that is easy to fly into. For example, if I'm throwing an event in Breckenridge, Colorado, it's gonna be super hard for somebody to get a direct flight to Breckenridge. They're most likely gonna have to fly into Denver and then drive a couple hours up to Breckenridge. It's a beautiful location, and it could definitely work. However, if I throw the event in Orlando or Miami or Los Angeles or Austin, Texas, there's big international airports in those cities, and it's easily accessible for my attendees. And finally, step number 3, once I have found the time of year that I want to throw the event, and I have found the 3 to 5 cities that I would consider throwing the event in, I like to pick 1 to 3 venues from those 3 to 5 cities to submit RFPs to. And what's an RFP, you may ask? An RFP stands for Request for Proposal. And this is something that you submit to venues when you're considering throwing an event with them. It's basically a way to tell them about yourself, your brand, what type of event you're wanting to throw. Basically a lot of high level information to give them a good idea if they'll be able to accommodate your event or not. Now, if you've thrown events before, you've probably submitted an RFP, but if you've never submitted an RFP, or you're looking to improve the ones that you currently submit, I'm going to link down my own personal RFP template down below. Now, I'm not saying that you have to use it. Maybe you do, maybe you use parts of it, but the RFP template I'm giving you down below is one that I've used for my entire events career, and I've never really had any trouble with it. So it's up to you if you want to use it. Before I dive into some more tips, I actually want to go through a website that I use to find venues. So you can see on my screen over here, it's this website called Cvent. Now, Cvent is an entire events brand. I'm pretty sure they have a software that can help you manage your events, and probably a lot of other offerings, but I really only use them for their venue selection software because I think it's amazing. So for example, I'm going to type in Miami as the location where I'm going to be throwing my event. My start dates are, let's go over into May. My start date is May 10th and my end date is May 12th. So a Friday to Sunday event, which is something I'd probably never do, but for the sake of an example, let's see what they got. And my event size is going to be, let's say 2,000 attendees per day. And the guest rooms per night. So this is if you're going to do a room block. I like to do room blocks. Essentially, a room block is when you commit to fulfill a certain amount of rooms to a venue, and then the venue will set those rooms aside, usually at a discounted rate, and give you your own personal link so that your attendees can buy their ticket and go book a room. Or if it's a private event, you can just send that link out to the attendees and they can have a seamless room booking process. It does put you at a little bit of a liability. If you don't fulfill that room block, you owe the resort that revenue that is still outstanding. But knock on wood, I've never really had an issue fulfilling a room block. So let's say I want to reserve 700 rooms per night for my attendees. Now I'm going to find the venues. Now, as you can see, it generates a massive list of venues to look at. Now, these event spaces are pretty small, but this one is looking pretty good to me right here. The Fontainebleau Miami Beach. It's got 107,000 square feet of event space. So I'm going to click over into view details. Click over. The first thing I like to look at is meeting space, because if a resort or a venue or whatever it is can't accommodate the size of event I'm throwing, there's really no point in continuing any conversations or submitting an RFP. So you can see right here, total meeting space of 107,000 square feet. The largest room is 42,000 square feet, which is actually pretty huge. And they actually have an outdoor space that is 20,000 square feet as well. So I'm actually not a science major or a math major, so I can't look at the square footage and intuitively connect the dots on how many people that can hold. So I'm going to go over to the capacity chart right here. And this is where I can see how many people each room can hold. So I'm gonna scroll down to right here. Let's look at the Pearl Ballroom. It's 16,500 square feet, and it can hold about 1,200 people in theater style. So if I'm throwing an event that's 2,000 people per day, this definitely isn't gonna work. And it actually doesn't look like they have any meeting space that would be able to accommodate my event. That's interesting. They said the largest room was 42,000 square feet, but I didn't see that in there. Let me see if I can find anything else on this capacity chart. So you scroll down. It's actually very nice how they have like a nice presentation for you to kind of get a layout of the resort. If you can get a layout of the venue. Let's see right here. Those are a little too small. Oh, right here. 31,340 square feet. That seems like it's pretty big. It can hold 2,128 people theater style. So if I'm throwing a 2,000 person a day event, this one is actually, it could work. You know, having a little bit of extra space is a good idea in my opinion. You don't want your room to feel too cramped. So this one might work. I would definitely consider submitting an RFP to it, but I can circle back to it. So let's say that's Miami. I've covered Miami. I'm going to go back and I'm going to search for another city and see if I have better luck. I know I said a list of other cities, but I'm actually going to do Las Vegas just because I know they're going to have event space that can accommodate a 2,000 person. So we'll do the start date is going to be, let's try, actually no, we'll keep the same dates just to limit the variables. It was May 10th to the 12th. The event size was 2,000 attendees per day, and the rooms were, I think it was 700 rooms. So we're gonna find some venues now. Here we go. We're in Las Vegas now. We got the Paris, Las Vegas. We got Red Rock Resort. You can see 100,000 square feet, 140,000 square feet, 560,000 square feet of event space at the Wynn. Let's click into the Wynn, and I want to view the details. Click over into meeting space. Yeah, you can see here they've got it all out on the software, which is a lot better. I don't have to click into like a pitch deck, but looks like the Crystal Ballroom has a maximum capacity of 10,962. If I scroll over here, 10,962 people theater style. That's a massive event. And I would definitely be able to use this resort for my event, because typically the way that venues work is if you have a ballroom, you can usually split that ballroom up into different chunks. So if the ballroom can hold 10,962, I'd probably only need to use a fourth or a sixth of that ballroom. And I could just rent that, or I could use the other sections of the ballroom for smaller events or VIP areas. So this is a resort that I would consider throwing an event at. It satisfies the capacity of the event. So what I would do then is go to the website of Wynn and Encore Las Vegas, and I would submit an RFP, and I'd wait to hear back from their team to see if they have any availability during my desired time of the year. And in the future, I'll probably do a video where I walk through the entire process of submitting an RFP, but it's usually pretty simple. You usually go to the website and you'll find the section that says meetings and events or special events. And at the end, it'll be get in contact, and either you usually send them an email and then they'll respond to that email asking for an RFP, or there'll be a place where you can just upload an RFP PDF and the team will reach out to you. All right, so that's the process I usually go through when I'm looking and scouting for venues to throw my event. Of course, the event isn't perfect. As you can see, it gave me some options that weren't quite meeting my capacity needs. So I'll usually do a lot of independent research as well. If I want to throw an event in Miami, Florida, I'll usually search the biggest resorts in Miami, Florida, or the biggest convention spaces in Miami, Florida. And that'll usually send me down a good rabbit hole as well. But as you can see from the C-Event results, there aren't a lot of options out there for large events. So if your event is in the 2,000 to 5,000, maybe even 5 to 10,000 person range, or even bigger if you're an absolute baller, you can see why it's important to get started early, because event space is very hard to come by. Something else I want to mention is after you submit your RFP and you talk back and forth with their team, they're going to submit an initial offer to you. And if I have any advice that I want you to listen to during this entire course, it's that the initial quote is never the final quote. There's always room for negotiation. I'll walk you through a little example. I usually get a proposal from a venue with a food and beverage minimum commitment. And this is basically them asking me to commit to a certain amount of food and beverage when I'm throwing an event with them. And this food and beverage minimum is usually pretty big. However, what I've done in the past is I've actually opted to pay with a rental fee instead of a food and beverage minimum. So I did some research into food and beverage, and yes, food and beverage is actually the leading revenue driver for a lot of these venues, resorts, and convention spaces. They only get about 20 to 30% profit out of these food and beverage payments because the rest has to go to sourcing the food, paying the staff, paying taxes, and all that fun stuff. So if you're paying a venue $200,000, they're definitely not gonna be walking away with all $200,000. In reality, depending on the state, they're probably gonna be walking away with $25,000 to $50,000. However, rental fees go directly into the resort's pocket. Of course, they have to still pay some taxes, but it's not like food and beverage where there's a lot of overhead cost. Aside from taxes, a rental fee is pure profit for the venue or resort. So if a venue came at me with a $200,000 food and beverage minimum, I would probably send a counteroffer over saying, instead of committing to $200,000 in food and beverage, I'll commit to $50,000 in food and beverage, and I'll send you a $100,000 rental fee. So I'm saving $50,000, but the resort is making a lot more money than they would have if I would have committed to $200,000 food and beverage. So it's a win-win. Something else you need to do in this negotiation process is ask for all costs and commitments up front. That means any hidden fees, any partners you're committing to work with. Make sure to ask the venue that you're negotiating with for a list of all of those. And if they won't provide it for you, have your legal team review the contract and provide it for you. At the first event I ever threw, I actually got myself into a really bad situation because I didn't do this. I was throwing the event in Las Vegas, and when I signed the contract, I didn't know that I was committing to work with all of the in-house partners that the resort had. So when it came time for the event and I was getting my audio-visual quote back, on top of the $100,000 I was already going to spend on audio-visual, which was already over my budget, I got hit with a $75,000 rigging cost on top of the audio-visual quote. And this was about 2 weeks before the event, so there's really nothing I could do. I tried to fight it for a few days, but my back was against the wall and I had to pay the money. And I had no idea that I was committing to work with that partner. I had another partner lined up where I was going to pay about $5,000 to $10,000 for rigging, but instead I had to cough up the $75,000. So make sure you are having a legal team review all of your contracts, and make sure you're asking the venue or your legal team to find and provide all of the commitments you're making, both financial and related to labor. Down below, you'll actually be able to find a checklist which provides all the things that you should be looking for when you are negotiating with a venue and when you're reviewing a contract. And also, I will probably be making a video in the future about contracts and also about venue negotiation. But please have your legal team review all your contracts. That is extremely important, and they know exactly what to look for, because all it takes is one missed item to hit you with a massive unanticipated cost that can really ruin the morale going into the event. All right, I know this was a long video and I know it was a little bit all over the place, but hopefully it was helpful for you. And make sure you head over to the workbook and complete the section in phase 2 about picking your location, your venue, and your dates. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.